Created in 2005 and hosted by security industry veterans, Paul Security Weekly is your source for in-depth coverage of the latest vulnerabilities, exploits, and security research. Our weekly security news discussion dives deep into the security issues we face today and potential solutions in a fun and lively atmosphere. Each week, we bring on guests from the security community to learn about their journey and discuss topics relevant to their work and research. You can also subscribe to our show by visiting securityweekly.com/subscribe or look for Paul Security Weekly in your favorite podcast catcher. We've recorded a ton of content over the years, so we created Spotify playlists featuring some of our favorite episodes, including interviews with Marcus Random, John McAfee, and Chris Roberts, to name a few. You can find them at securityweekly.com/starter packs.
Welcome back to Business Security Weekly. I am your host, Matt Alderman, joined by Ben Carr and Tyler Robinson. Security Weekly listeners, InfoSec World 2023 is just weeks away. Have you registered to join over 2,500 cybersecurity experts on September 25th to 27th in Lake Buena Vista, Florida? InfoSec World is your gateway to a world of knowledge and growth. Don't miss the chance to enhance your career, connect with industry leaders, and make an impact on the rapidly evolving landscape. Secure your seat using discount code ISW23-SecWeek20 to save 20% off your registration. Register today by visiting securityweekly.com/InfoSec World 2023. Gentlemen, time for articles for the week. Tyler, glad you got all connected in there. Sorry about the last segment, buddy. But you got a nice spot on the Paul's Security Weekly ad.
Yeah, it looked all right.
Yeah, you look good there. All right, first article. Board members are struggling to understand cyber risks. Anybody surprised by this one?
Thank you, Captain Obvious. Yeah, this article definitely goes down as just mastering the obvious there. I don't know why they wouldn't struggle, because they're not really leveraging the expertise that's presented to them, and they seem to be fighting against, in some cases, bringing cyber expertise onto the board, right? This is just it's the state of the state, unfortunately.
I don't know if they're wary of bringing even cybersecurity on board in many cases, which could be some of that, but also like the reach out and or the competence of the advisors that are being brought in. I'm finding even some of the advisors that have been doing this for a long time aren't giving real great advice, to be fair. So I think there's a little bit of a disservice in both avenues. One, there's not enough of us to do this. Two, those that are doing this either have agendas or are a little bit out of touch with how this is actually playing out and things that are actually helping boards and companies in the current state of affairs. And both of those lend themselves to very bad outcomes, especially in the scenarios we're dealing with at the board level for things like ransomware.
Yeah, there was a section of this article that did call out that, scared to turn to the CISO to bridge the gap for fear of exposing their lack of understanding. That hasn't necessarily been my experience, to your point, Tyler. But what I have really seen in talking to a lot of people about this is it just seems like boards are hesitant to bring more people into the board, right? And it does seem like a little bit of a, I don't know, it's you got to be in the circle to get in the circle, which is self-defeating in itself. So it's a frustrating position when there is expertise out there. And even when you are the CISO of a company, the connection to the board, because I think CISOs are still not seen as having that full seat at the table, it can be really challenging to get meaningful traction with the board to have that conversation. And I think CISOs need to look for an ally, right? I mean, it's that's really the best term, is find an ally on the board that you can align with and try to have conversations out of the board discussion, try to figure out how to make that connection. And I think the other C-level execs in the company really should look to sponsor that interaction to get the most effect, because I mean, people aren't utilizing the resources that they have on staff. And to your point, sometimes the people they reach out to from an advisor perspective externally aren't giving necessarily the best advice, or they have crossed purposes. So I think that's a valid point, Tyler.
Yeah, I mean, we were hoping that the SEC guidelines would have fixed part of this because this, I think, is one of the big challenges, and they didn't. So I'm not surprised that it hasn't fixed anything. I think the second article, though, partially describes why there may be still some misalignment from these advisors, and that is the whole fact that cybersecurity is missing alignment with the business, right? This, I think, is the fundamental challenge at the board as well. If you bring in a cybersecurity expert that's talking about the technology and the technical and not figuring out how to equate it back to business risks and what it means for the business, there's going to continue to be a disconnect at the board as well, because it's obviously in the rest of the organization.
But Matt, why has
go ahead.
Legal had success at that then, right? Because legal is essentially doesn't have those things. Legal is
because legal terrifies people, risk. Right? There's always that stick with legal, and legal has understood how to tie the business nature or the business things that matter to executives and or a company with the stick on the end of it, right? Like, don't do this, and here's the cost and outcome.
Legal has figured out how to make it work, right? Like, we still haven't figured out how to make it work for us. Yeah, how can you not understand cyber being a business, having a business driver, a business aim for the company? I mean, I think companies are missing out on one of their biggest potential advantages is leveraging the CISO to essentially bolster the sales org, right? To create a competitive differentiator where they can market on that. And if you're the first market mover in that space to capitalize on cyber, that's a pure differentiator for you. So, I mean, I think it's just CISOs need to learn how to position, and businesses need to learn that they're missing a really large advantage that they're not taking advantage of.
Well, those monikers, right? The places that's happening typically are the ones that have traditionally been, cyber is a technology. They're a cost center. They're in the back. They're providing the technology. And to be fair, we're the ones that in those organizations that are typically, we like to sit behind the technology. We like to solve problems with technology. We didn't like to have to show up to the board members. We don't like the politics. We don't like people. In most cases, when you see that, you see a CISO that is highly technical that didn't have all the aptitude or has come up from a very technical background and has to learn some of this people skills and or business skills. And maybe they're not as adept to those as someone else that could lead differently with more of those as the center focus and bringing the technology as a facet or a vertical within inside of cybersecurity to the business as an offering.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Tyler. Like, you need to learn how to embrace the business side, and I guess leave the pure technology to your directs. I mean, you need to understand it, but that's why you have a team, right? Is to handle the technical side. You need to really be adept at the business side.
Yes, and that kind of leads into this next article. Now, this is written for the CIO and how to embrace the C-suite from a cybersecurity perspective. And I think the assumption is that the CISO is reporting to the CIO. But let's apply this to
Did you pick this article to try to poke me, Matt? Was that why you picked this? Because I read this and I felt like that.
I do like to provoke my co-hosts to get the real opinion out there. What I liked about this article is, let's assume this is a CISO. This is talking about the 3 roles that you need to embrace to build out security teamwork. And it starts with the CEO, which is, if we go back these last 2 conversations, right, these other 2 articles, it all starts with the CEO. And if we're having conversations about cybersecurity and the CEO is not the one driving these conversations, folks, we have a disconnect.
Yeah, one thing I loved about this article, Matt, was that to that point, that the number one thing they said here, the CEO to be the chief cybersecurity partner. And like, that had never dawned on me to position it that way. But I think, in the future, that's exactly the way I'm going to position this. Like, the conversation with the CEO, the first conversation needs to be, I need you to be the chief, cybersecurity partner. Like, you need to be aligned. We need to be aligned together. If we're not, it's a recipe for failure.
Yep. Then it talks about the Chief Human Risk Officer, HR, to help to build out the security culture. Well, of course. It's funny because we've been talking about this on the living security side around our personas, right? And I hadn't thought, I thought about it, but how important is HR and helping to build out a culture of security? They've got to be really important in larger organizations.
Yeah,
and there's an opportunity
huge.
there.
You have to. I've done this in the past. You have to have alignment there, and it's a great partner because they're the ones responsible generally for the training at an organization, right? It rolls back into them, and so if you miss that on developing your security awareness program, it's just never going to be as successful, right? And get their buy-in, they can help tune the cyber into the human side of the company and what the culture is. And I think if you can move culture, you can do a lot more.
Well, without that culture, we keep tying this back to all the stupid ransomware that's always happening and these damn actors and what they're doing. But you look at something like MGM, right? And we're back to social engineering again. Obviously, We've been failing at this for quite a while. We're making headway and people are aware of things. Now, how are we utilizing that awareness, providing the procedures and protocols that are available and easy and understand inside of the culture and the company so that the norm is to be secure by default, and then putting the technological controls so that these users don't have to make the decisions that are outside of their job description. They shouldn't have to know the level of technicality. We do need security by default as the culture, and they need to be able to make good decisions and know what to do, but there should be technological controls adept enough to help them do that in a manner that is so easy that it is not outside of their job description. And I think that is where we're failing.
But you have to move that in the culture of the company, right? Like to I think
Correct.
Maybe to your point there is that, if you're trying to push a direction, it can be the right direction to go. But if you're not thinking about how the corporation's culture will form that direction, then you could be pushing uphill, right? Whereas if you make a shift and you do it in a different way, you could ultimately be much more effective in the same direction, but you figured out how to tweak it so it aligns with the culture mood of the company. So if the company is very easygoing and enjoys comedy, maybe the comedy thing is the way to go, right? If it's very serious and very regulated, then maybe trying to go a comedy way isn't going to be as successful in that organization. So you have to try to figure out to go with the friction of the company, not against the friction of the company.
Yeah, if you do go the opposite way of the company too, like what is the point if the company loses its ethos and the reason that the company is successful and yet gains a little bit of security, then you're losing the differentiator in the market that has brought you to the success point that's gotten you to where you're at. So you can't do one or the other. You really do have to go with the culture and do that in the correct manner. Otherwise, there's no point, and then the business fails in the opposite direction. So you're 100% right. That culture has to match and fit, but has to do so in a way that still enables the business without losing itself. And security has always been very, very much a friction center for most places, just because, again, a lot of the people in this industry tend to be those people that don't fully understand the nuance of human behavior, psychology, or even some of the underlying fears and or things that drive normal people, right? We'll say most of the people in our industry are a little bit outside of the normal pathways of operation for the humankind. So getting that right is not always easy to do, but that's where you have to get buy-in from HR. You got to get buy-in from the other department leads, and you have to have some good people on your team that understand people and how this is going to play out with inside of your organization to fit that culture. Otherwise, it will fail from the beginning, and it won't end up well for most people.
Agreed.
Yep. Agreed. And we can't forget the last of the C-suite to embrace, which is the CFO, because he's got all the money.
We need that money.
Yeah. Yeah. Without money, you're not getting anywhere. Look, I think this extends, right? Like if you take this process and like look at what the advantage is to be gained, what the alignment is, like you could extend that, right? Like if you don't have a good connection with legal, it's going to be really difficult. They're kind of should be tied at the hip with the CISO. Sales, like align yourself to the business, right? Increasing the sales volume or the revenue stream, and that's a really great place to be when you can be looked at a producer as opposed to a consumer. You can keep going on that, but I think these three are the core and where any good CISOs should start.
Yep, agreed. Now we're going to shift over to some leadership articles. There's a couple here there's, I think, 3 left, but there's a couple of them I kind of wanted to dig into a little deeper. The first one's around agile leadership, right? We've had this conversation before. And as we were just talking about the previous article, like CISOs have to be agile as well, because part of it's culture, part of it's the different leadership structure, and depending on the business, the overall business dynamics as well. And so what in here stuck out to you, Ben or Tyler, as things that agile leaders need to really be cognizant of?
Well, first for me was embracing change, right? Change is inevitable. Change will happen. I think you need to be able to roll with that. So from a security perspective, I think a lot of times we look at it as, we always have to be defensive. We always have to defend the company, and that's true. And we can't afford to be wrong on that, right? Attacker only has to be right once. We have to be right all the time. But when you look at how you manage that internally inside of a company, let's not talk about the technical controls, but how we manage and interact with people and be a leader. I think you have to be able to be flexible and roll with it and change and be able to let things fail, right? That's the whole part of the agile culture. We're not used to that from a technical sense, and I don't necessarily think we're going to be able to fully embrace that. But I think from a people side and how we manage and lead, give people the opportunity to fail, right? Be able to fail yourself, fail fast, learn from your mistakes, be able to embrace that change. And then that kind of rolls into the other things, how you empower your teams, how you do that with clear communication, iterative process. It's all wrapped around embracing change and being okay with the status quo not always being the status quo. Tyler,
having that as part of your culture too, right? That status quo, like really encouraging and being that example leader of not always knowing everything, having that continual learning and relearning process as part of the culture. Like, hey, we've got a new technology. We really do have to learn it. And guess what? There's going to be another one coming. So that continual, always ongoing learning, understanding, and forcing the issue that there will never be a status quo. We will never get to a secure point in time. We're never going to be through our security, our dev cycle, our architecture cycle. There's not a point in time. I think a lot of places, and especially even board members, get hooked around the idea, well, once we get to the cloud, we're going to be secure and we don't have to worry so much about this. Once we get to a DevOps and we've got a secure CDIC pipeline, then we're fine. Like, really reiterating the culture around this is an ongoing and forever process that reiterates, and we're always going to be learning something new and adopting something new, which causes us to have to be malleable and have to be that flexible and continually adapting entity that it has that culture. Once we have that set up and getting even your customers to embrace the fact that we are always trying to do better, be better, and sometimes that comes at the cost of having our customers have a changed experience and getting them excited and understanding that that is a positive thing and really reframing that so that the mindset changes. That's when you can start to really continually grow and continually gain that 1 or 2% above your peers until you now are, in the upper 5 or 10% of the population of companies that are doing really good security. That's when you start to really make a difference and get to a point where you can do really interesting things, and then you can start to leverage those for things like profit growth.
When I was listening to the previous segment, we were talking a little bit about complexity. And Teresa made a point around, these systems are complex. And then in this article, it talks about adapting to complexity. And I almost want to say, yes, but can I also change the complexity? Like, we also have to try to think about how to simplify certain things, I think, as leaders.
Yes.
Sometimes it's too complex. Systems are too complex. Are there ways to simplify? That's almost contrarian a little bit from this article, but to me, that's also being agile. Like, it doesn't have to be complex. Can't I, as a leader, also simplify things and make things less complex?
That's intuitive, but doesn't often happen. I think we get caught up in, that's not the way we do things around here. Well, should it be, right? I mean, having the flexibility and allowing people to ask the question, like, just because this is the way we've done it or this is the plan, like we should be able to question that and ask, like, is there a better way to do things? Is there a simple, less energy intensive way, right? I mean, if you think about like a state of energy thing, right? The more complexity you build into it, the more chance for failure and problems down the line. So I think, if you build with a lower energy state, simple, that KISS process, I think then ultimately that usually ends in better outcomes for people and less cost.
And as a leader, the more times you ask that and the more times you bring that process into the normal thought or planning stages, then your team begins to do that by nature. And that simplification and getting to the most simple starting point is where you can actually design some really interesting things that don't end up with such complexities that are unnecessary, that add additional security constraints or mitigating and compensating controls that have to be put into place. There's a bunch of really positive things that come from that simplicity, but that really starts at the leadership level of asking, can we do this different? Are we thinking about this in the simplest way? And going back to making that a process and a norm for your team and the culture of your team to ask those questions of themselves and of their team members as they begin to design, because they're typically the ones bringing a lot of the initiatives and ideas to the table. So how can we get them to do that in a meaningful manner that is more simple and starting at that point?
Yeah, highlighting off one of the previous articles, like work within the culture of the company, right? Like figure out how to do that. You can't, you shouldn't go into that saying, "Hey, this isn't the way we should do it. I've got a better way." It's really about, that servant leadership of asking, like, is there a better, does anybody else have a thought process on, is there a better way to do this? Like, is this the optimal way to do things? Like just asking the questions and then letting people come back to you with the answers, right? If you're always trying to source the answer for yourself, typically not going to be a successful outcome, right?
Yep, agreed. I'm going to this next article. It's a podcast, so I'm just going to kind of reference people to it. It talks about what makes an authentic leader, and I'm just going to read this statement. People should go listen to it because it gives you some tips and tricks. The paradox is that a lot of times, in order to become more authentic, more fully yourself, but in a new capacity, you can't start that way. You actually have to do things that don't come naturally and that sometimes make you feel like a fake or an imposter. Use that as kind of your preface going into listening to that one, only because I want to keep us a little bit on time today. The last article here is how to boost productivity, which again, I think for leaders is one of those challenging areas, right? We always want more out of our staff, right? But we need to do it in a positive way to get people to continue to drive that productivity game that we all want without making it feel like, you're just kind of a jerk about it. Like,
well, that's true. I mean, I think the last point on there, being accountable, is really, really important, right? You have to make sure you're accountable to your team and you're accountable to management, right? And how you show that accountability will dictate a lot of the way that you're interpreted within the organization, right? And so accountability starts from doing it, the right way, handling things, being responsible for stuff, not throwing other people under the bus or for the way they did something, but saying, hey, look, we're going to stand behind this, right? And you're going to back your team. And I think that's super important. The rest of these are all great things too, right? Clear expectations, really defining what the outcome should be, being very clear with that, so you're not there's no ambiguity in it, right? I like to start out with, almost like for our project, a set of success criteria that we're defining at the end of it. Fostering open communication. I mean, these are all really good points here. But if you can maximize these things, get to a productivity gain, win for everybody.
Yeah, that's a double-edged sword. That's one of those scary ones to be very careful with. The productivity and getting to that maximum level of productivity while making sure your morale's within inside the company and the burnout rate all come within inside of the margins that don't push people away. That's very, very hard to do. So keeping a very close
Tyler,
tab on the pulse of the
think
company.
It's important. Like the productivity doesn't mean that you're generating the maximum amount of output, right? Like that's not productivity, right? That's just maximum output. Productivity means like you're taking all those other key things that you just highlighted, like making sure that you're not affecting burnout, making sure that, people have a feeling of respect and there's a balance between their personal life and their professional life. Like, if you're doing all those things and getting to the maximum productivity, you've got 20% assigned for, just housekeeping work that has to be done, right? Training work that has to be done, like all those things. If you're doing that, then you're hitting maximum productivity. A lot of people confuse that with maximum output, and that's not the same thing.
Right. Which I think is a very, very good point, because a lot of people will take productivity and equate it to output and therefore just do more, when it's do things more efficiently, right? And still have the time to do the other things and still keep a work-life balance, which is the big one in here. Is because if you do, to Tyler's point, you push them too far, they're going to leave. They're going to go somewhere else. And now you got a bigger problem, because now you got to go backfill potentially a set of skill gaps that may be hard to go find or recruit.
Well, where do people see this, right? They'll typically find it on the survey reports every year that every company's doing now, right? Well, we're doing great output, we're producing great results, but at the end of the day, nobody's happy on the team. We've got a retention problem. It just manifests itself in so many different ways internally, and so you've got to figure out, like in everything in life, there must be balance.
Must be balance. We must have Zen. Gentlemen, always a pleasure. Glad you could join me today, Tyler. Thank you, everyone, for watching and listening. We'll see you next week on Business Security Weekly.